Hi, Women of Welcome. It's kind of a sad occasion why we need to go live right now. But I'm looking for Matt Soerens to come on here and help us digest the new memo that just came out yesterday from USCIS about our refugee neighbors and friends and what could be unfolding in the days and the weeks ahead. So if you're new to what is going on, hopefully you've kind of been alerted by some of the things that we have mentioned, and I promise you, as we have more information, we will continue to send that out through, let's see here. I promise to send you as much information as we have when we have it. World Relief will be a big part of that. You can also stay abreast of what is going on through our other co-founding partner, the National Immigration Forum. But I've got Matt with me, and whenever these things tend to happen, Matt and I tend to jump on together and try and digest this. So what we want to talk about for the next few minutes here is what was the memo that just came out from USCIS? How does that affect our refugee neighbors that have been recently resettled over the previous Biden administration? What does it mean? What can we do? And what is the call to action, especially for Christians during this time? So I have Matt with me, Vice President of Advocacy for World Relief. Hi, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be with you, Bri.
So here we are, and I think we were all pretty devastated yesterday to see the news about a memo coming out from the Department of Homeland Security and United States Citizenship and Immigration Services Department, implying that over the next, I don't know how many days, weeks, months, they would be looking to reevaluate and potentially readjudicate about 233,000 refugees that were resettled during the Biden administration. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. It's worth mentioning that nearly 100,000 of those who were resettled during the previous administration were persecuted Christians. And that is not lost on us. And for an administration that claims to care about persecuted Christians internationally and persecuted Christians domestically, this is a huge flag for us that we want to make sure that we get right and then use our voice well. So, Matt, tell us what we should know about the memo and how serious this is, what this actually really means in the days ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Bri. It's profoundly concerning to us at World Relief. I mean, we've been involved in resettling many of these families who arrived in the last 4 years, just as we have been resettling families going back to the 1970s, right? We've done this all under Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. And we really don't think this should be a partisan issue, but basically the administration is calling into question the refugee determinations that were made during the previous administration. And these are career professionals for the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security who are making those determinations. But the effect of this is they are saying they're going to re-interview all primary applicants for refugee status who were lawfully resettled during the prior administration, so from January of 2021 they're actually saying through February of 2025, earlier this year. Overall, that's more than 200,000 people. In fact, we think it's about 233,000 people if you include the derivatives, so family members who are also affected by this. And there's a lot we don't know about this still. We don't know exactly what the process is going to be, but we do know that it's creating profound fear for refugees who were lawfully resettled to the United States, who are here lawfully, who went through very thorough vetting overseas, processes that often take a year or longer to complete overseas. And that's once you start the process, for many of these people, they were waiting in a refugee camp for a decade before they even got invited into that vetting process. They then finally made it to the United States. They're safe here. We've been telling them at World Relief for the last number of months, despite what's happening to other categories of immigrants who we are very concerned about, people with maybe temporary protected status or with humanitarian parole, or those who may be undocumented, refugees should be safe. Refugees should be secure. You already cleared that vetting, that determination that you belong here and you're rebuilding your life here. And this is calling that into question in ways that are just creating a lot of fear for people for whom the possibility of being sent back, it's not even totally clear where they'd be sent back to, whether it's to a refugee camp or that second country where they were living, or back to the country that they fled persecution in. And as you said, it's actually difficult to get precise numbers on religious demographics of the people affected by this because the administration stopped publishing that data. So we really only have that through last October. There's several months we don't have data for. But we overall, about half of the refugees resettled, a little more than half in the last 4 years have been Christians, and most of those are coming from countries where Christians face very severe persecution. Of course, we're concerned about those who are coming from other religious backgrounds as well, but I do think there is a particular, a lot of Christians have heard the president talk about standing with persecuted Christians, and most of us cheer for that. We want to stand with our brothers and sisters in Christ who are persecuted for their faith. The refugee resettlement program is a way that we've done that historically as a country under Republican and Democratic administrations. And this would be potentially sending some of those people back to be persecuted. And that's not something we should be doing as a country. So it's a really important time for American Christians in particular to pay attention to what's happening. I don't think it's an accident this is happening when most of us want to be starting our Thanksgiving meal preparations and checking out. I totally get that. There's maybe an irony to me also that it's a holiday when we remember people fleeing religious persecution and finding religious freedom in the United States in the 1500s. And that's who I want our country still to be, as a place that offers religious freedom, offers freedom from any kind of persecution.
I think one of the questions that I had, when I read the memo, first of all, I was concerned about the family that we had resettled recently, that 10 couples in my church had resettled, and thinking through, well, what would be the prioritization of revisiting these cases and the re-adjudication process of that. And I think the answer is it's still too soon to tell. We don't know how they're going to classify or categorize or even prioritize the vetting that they're going to do. And there's just still so many unknowns. Matt and I were just talking before we jumped on here. I mean, this memo isn't even officially published to USCIS's website. So this was something that is kind of a internal memo that has not been made officially public. So there are still so many questions, and it will be important in the days ahead to make sure that you are signed up for communications from Women of Welcome as well as World Relief. So I would head over to womenofwelcome.com and worldrelief.org and make sure that you sign up for the newsletter so that you can be aware of what's going on. Also, I think it's going to be incredibly important in the days ahead to make sure that if you're involved with refugees, you have proximity to them, maybe you resettled them yourself, is to be getting in touch with the organizations that helped you resettle those individuals. Matt and I do say this with a little bit of caution, though, because we know that a lot of those resettlement agencies have drastically lost funding and staff during this the last 10 months, 11 months of this administration. And so there's a lot of patience in the midst of the urgency to try and get yourself collected and to be prepared for what might be coming. There is an understaffing and a shortage of personnel in this space right now. So it might be great to just do a little bit of due diligence yourself. I mean, your family or a family that you're connected to will definitely, most likely, if their case is called for re-adjudication, will need a lawyer. They will need representation. So what does the funding of that look like? Is that something that your small groups can pull together and help fund, or is that something that you can do some research about pro bono work in your state or low bono work in your state? Or is that something that you can go to your church and ask for help on in that regard? So Matt, what would you say in terms of the people who are quite frightened about what this means? What should we be really concerned about right now? And what are the things that we just don't know and that we kind of need to hold on to? I mean, we're less than 24 hours of this news kind of breaking. So we want to hold some space for some information to unfold.
That's exactly right. I do think it's really important that we have a little bit of patience with this process. I understand why people are upset. And I would say the first thing that people can absolutely do now is let their elected officials know that this is not acceptable. And we've already got a statement for Christians to sign on the World Relief website. We'll link that here, worldrelief.org/statement on refugees, I believe it is. But so that part should start now. There should be some pushback. There should be members of Congress reaching out to the administration and saying this is absolutely unacceptable. How we help support our refugee neighbors, I think it's going to take a little bit of time to understand exactly what is being asked of them. That's something our programs team at World Relief, and I'm sure our peer organizations doing refugee resettlement are doing the same to the best of their ability. We'll have information soon on our website. I just was reviewing the draft of this, and our legal immigration lawyers are reviewing everything, making sure it's as accurate as possible based on the information we currently have. So we'll have that up on our World Relief website soon as well. I would say there are going to be financial needs for some of these families. There will be financial needs for organizations like World Relief because we want to do the best we can to provide legal representation with an immigration attorney or an accredited representative who has the legal authority for that. But we're going to need to grow capacity for that. So giving to organizations like World Relief right now is really urgent as well. And I think the most important thing is, if you were a good neighbor team for a refugee family, you're an individual volunteer, reach out to the people that you know. You don't necessarily have to scare them with the information, but just say, hey, I know that there's a lot of information coming out right now. We're still trying to figure out what it all means, but I need you to know that I'm with you. I need you to know that we're walking alongside you, that we're going to figure this out with you, and we are praying for you, and we are advocating for you. And then don't just say that to your refugee friends, but really pray for them and really advocate for them. So, sign onto that statement yourself. Ask your pastor, hey, is this something that we can talk about in the context of our church? There's lots of strong opinions about immigration issues, but there's actually been remarkable consensus for many, many years and decades that refugee resettlement is something that Christians believe in. It's people who are vetted overseas, who fled a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons like their faith in Jesus or their association with the U.S. military or their peaceful opposition to an authoritarian government over in some other part of the world, people fleeing war and conflict. And there's a lot of Christians who have been have been a part of the resettlement process over the decades. And now is the time for us to speak up and say, hey, we want our government to respect this process, to respect the due process that's been in place, and not to re-traumatize people by bringing them through a new series of interviews, not to just generate fear for people who have done everything that we've asked of them. They've gone through long wait processes overseas. They've gone through vetting. They've gone through background checks. They have once arrived. They've found jobs. They've found, they've been working on learning English, uh, and they've integrated really well in the vast majority of cases. This is just throwing a wrench into that as we enter the holiday season with people fearful that they could be sent back to a situation of danger or persecution. And our government needs to do better than that. We need to let our members of Congress know that the vast majority of them, Republicans and Democrats, have supported refugee resettlement historically. This has not historically been a controversial program. That we need them to speak up and encourage the president that this is not acceptable. I don't know that the president's even. I mean, we know this is a real memo from USCIS, the part of the Department of Homeland Security. How high up this goes, I don't think we necessarily know. But this needs to be something the president is paying attention to. And as he's saying, we're going to stand with those who are persecuted, including for their faith. We're not going to re-traumatize people who've already been brought here. We're going to, if there's individual cases, of course, that's appropriate. But to re-interview hundreds of thousands of people is just unacceptable and also expensive. And I mean, the amount of resources that our government, taxpayer resources that our government will spend on this is incoherent, and it doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. So I think um, one of the questions as you're trying to explain this to people, sometimes you're like, all right, I want to go and say this to my pastor. I want to talk to somebody about that. And we do have a statement from World Relief that we'd love for you to sign on and ask your pastor and your friends to sign on. This is something to share with your friends. Undoubtedly, when you start sharing about refugees, I think one of the questions that can very naturally come up is, well, what is wrong with the government wanting to try and make sure that we are safe by making sure that the previous administration didn't rush through processes and that these people are actually truly persecuted people, meeting a legal definition of persecution. Can you just for the sake of conversation and people feeling confident to continue to share this information, can you just share with us as briefly as possible, what is the vetting process that we know to be true, and the confidence that we can have in that in terms of refugees? Because just so that everybody knows, asylum seekers coming to the border have an extremely different vetting process and pathway than refugees who are vetted overseas do, and then we're invited by the US government. So we're talking about two separate people groups, asylum seekers and refugees. And we're talking about refugees, persecuted people who are now going to be subject to re-adjudication of their cases. And before Matt gets into that, one of the things that I was just thinking about, as I was even just thinking about how to approach this with refugees that are here in my community, I was just thinking about how difficult it's going to be if their case gets pulled up And then they have to reconvince our government by showing and bringing up and revealing and pulling old photos and files, whatever they can, to just prove how much pain and suffering and persecution they've endured to then
Yeah.
get here. And just trying to put myself in a very empathetic posture of, what if this was my family and I felt for the first time in however many years that I was going to be safe in the most powerful nation that's full of Christians in the world, and now I'm this could all just be gone in a flash. And when you see other news of what's happening in other spaces, um, and other immigrants being deported to countries that they've never actually been to before in their lives, it can, the fear and the re-traumatization of that is very, very real. So it is so important that we do our due diligence and speak up, not only walk with our refugee brothers and sisters that are here, but also to do the due diligence, to attach confidence to our compassion in this space so that we could use our voice well, because nothing will change unless you use your voice. So Matt, tell us, what is the vetting process and why can we be so confident in it? I mean, it's not 100% foolproof, but it's pretty darn close.
Yeah, I mean, the refugee vetting process for a very long time has been held up as sort of the gold standard in vetting. Among all the various categories of immigrants coming to the United States, and any lawfully admitted immigrant goes through some vetting, but refugees go through the most thorough vetting. And that's the opinion of the Heritage Foundation and various others who've assessed this process. The best evidence that this vetting process works is that it has had this remarkable track record. So, for example, I think we hear concerns sometimes, well, how do we know that terrorists couldn't come through the refugee vetting process? The Cato Institute's assessed this and goes back, for decades. And if you look particularly at Islamist terrorist attacks, which is a concern of a lot of Americans, there's been more than 3.5 million refugees resettled since the Refugee Act of 1980 was signed into law, and there's not been a single American life taken in a terrorist attack perpetrated by an Islamist terrorist since in all those years. That's actually a remarkable record. Thank God for that. And of course, we're grateful for that vetting process. But there's just not the evidence that this refugee vetting process has failed us. And yet, to your point, Bri, to to recall everyone to an interview, hundreds of thousands of people when you include children and family members who would be derivatives. Uh, I sort of think of it, and it's not even a good comparison because it's not nearly as traumatic. But what if everyone in my city was told, actually, we are not there. We've had some unsafe drivers. We're going to redo all of the driver's tests. Your driver's license no longer is valid. We need you to go redo your driver's test. The capacity to carry out those driver's tests in a timely manner. So you're going to be inconvenienced for that. We would be upset, right? That's frustrating. Why are you picking on me when I've been a good driver? And that's, I think, the dynamic so many times over because the threat is not losing your driver's license. The threat is being sent to a country where you faced persecution. And even the retelling of that story, you need to go through that interview, is going to, re-traumatize people in just unnecessary and I think cruel ways. And the other dynamic that's at play here is they've also announced they're going to stop the processing of green cards for refugees. So under the law, refugees are legally present from the day they arrive, and it's an indefinite legal status. But the way the law is written, why they wrote this in 1980, I don't know. But going back to 1980, the law says 1 year after arrival, refugees shall apply for their green cards, their lawful permanent resident status. And that's important because they can't apply to 1 year after. And usually it would take normally it would have taken 6 months. It's taken longer than that. Most of the country right now, it's already slowed down. And now processing is halted indefinitely. Well, that means, for example, under some of the provisions of the new Budget Reconciliation Act that passed last summer, the big beautiful bill, refugees are no longer eligible for food stamps until they have the green cards, which is now an indefinite delay. There's certain family reunification petitions that you need to have your green card to be able to file. So there's families who've been waiting to get their green card so they could hopefully be reunited with loved ones. That's being put on hold. And just the limbo that it tells you when we're not processing your application for permanent resident status, which is also a prerequisite to citizenship. Refugees in most cases are eager to be moving towards citizenship, but you can't do that until you get your green card approved. And so I think it's just profoundly disorienting and destabilizing for people who've worked so hard to follow all the processes that were put in front of them and finally thought they were safe and secure in this country. And I want them desperately to be safe and secure in this country. And that's why I think advocacy right now is so vital. I mean, we had 20,000 signatures on our statement on resettlement of Christian women and men and pastors and leaders and lay people several months ago. I would hope we could do even more than that this time around, and that will send a real message to Congress, to the president, that there are Christians who care about refugees and are standing with their refugee neighbors.
So there's been questions and comments that have been coming in about scripts and about what we can do and what do we actually share and all of that. So the good news is that in the coming days, as we have more information, we will be able to send that out in our various newsletters and on our social media platforms. So make sure to stay in touch. But the one thing that we have right now is we have a sign-on letter. Matt, tell us a little bit about the sign-on letter that you were just kind of alluding to just now.
Yeah, so basically this is it's a letter to both the president and to members of Congress, worldrelief.org/statement on refugees. You can find it there. And we'll link that here as well. It is basically it's asking the president and members of Congress who didn't change this policy directly, but certainly can influence the president, um, to ensure that we do not send refugees back to situations of danger, that we don't re-traumatize them by proceeding with this plan to require new, basically re-adjudication of refugee determinations that were already made years ago in many cases. So I would love for everyone listening to this to sign that statement. I'd love for everyone listening to this to think about 4 or 5 or 6 people you could, you know, tag on Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media you use, or bring it to friends at your church and ask them, pass your cell phones around, ask your friends to sign on, ask your pastors, is this something that we can talk about as a church? Our church, many of our churches have been directly involved in standing with refugees. The way we stand with them now is by speaking up when this policy that will harm them is going into place. And most people and most churches already agree with this. I mean, Lifeway Research did a poll earlier this year that found that 70% of evangelical Christians believe that the U.S. has a moral responsibility to receive refugees. This action is really the United States turning its back on that moral commitment, and we as the church need to stand up and say this is not acceptable.
Well, and I feel like it's such a whiplash in terms of national narrative, especially among Christians, of we want to care about the persecuted church, and even the president himself saying, I'm keeping my eye on what's happening with persecuted Nigerian Christians, and to talk about care and concern has to be matched with action, and this seems to be in direct conflict with caring for persecuted peoples and persecuted Christians. We're talking about what we estimate about 100,000 persecuted Christians that their caseloads could be recalled and readjudicated. So this is not the action that would match with the stated concern for care for persecuted Christians and for persecuted people in general. So these are the three things, folks. One, we want you to stay connected. Reach out to your refugee friends. Some of them may not know this information because this hasn't been directly published on the website, which means it's likely not been formally communicated through agencies and or government programs or departments statewide. So this might be new information, and it's going to be really, really hard information to hear. It's going to be probably pretty devastating information, and we don't want to scare people, but we want to offer our presence. And we say, this is a possibility. We do not know at this time, we're just less than 24 hours in, we do not know at this time whose cases are going to be recalled, if all of them. They said it's going to be a broad overview, or if it's going to be some of them that are just from predominantly Muslim countries, or it could be, oh, this case passed too quickly, or we don't know just yet. So we don't want to scare our friends. We want to walk with them in presence and tell them this is a possibility. And if it does come to fruition, we're going to be with you. So make sure that they are paying attention to what's in their mail, what's in their email. Make sure their email and their addresses are up to date in the system. That is incredibly important, because you're kind of like, in trouble if you do, in trouble if you don't, right? And what you want to do is you want to keep doing what is legal and what is right. So you want to update your email address. You want to update your mailing address with all of the forms in the state allowances that you have to kind of continue that legal process, right? The second thing is we want you to be able to reach out to your elected officials, and we will give you scripts. But the third thing that we want you to do is we would love for you to sign on to this letter, this statement, and share it with as many people as you have. If you are concerned about language, about vetting, or language about around this, what I would say is there are articles, there are blogs, there are on Women of Welcome and on World Relief. I would also say that Women of Welcome has an equipping series. It's a video series, and we thoroughly explain the vetting process for asylum seekers and for refugees in that video. And you can find that on Women of Welcome's YouTube account. So if you're wanting a video to share that has a more thorough explanation, or you just want to educate yourself a little bit more, that's there too. So we're going to link in the comments. We're going to link in our stories. We're also going to send this out in our weekly communications, the sign-on statement. But it is worldrelief.org/
Statement on refugees.
statement on refugees. Okay, so we'll put all of that in. And folks, we're not going anywhere either. So as we have more information, as we know more, we will continue to share more. So thank you for caring. Thank you for walking with the persecuted. Thank you for paying attention and being diligent, and for using your voice. Anything else, Matt, people should know?
Just please be praying for your refugee neighbors right now as well, and pray for those who are working alongside them. It's a heavy season, but I also, Thanksgiving is a good time to be grateful for the ways that God has provided and to trust that He will provide.
Another great opportunity this week to reach out, reconnect, invite them to your dinner table. I know that sometimes can be intimidating, but this is the work of hospitality, biblical hospitality and welcome. So we'll try and keep you informed and equipped as we know more. So thanks so much, everybody.